Clearing bearing is a navigational technique used to ensure a vessel's safe passage around hazards or dangers, such as shoals, rocks, or other obstructions while sailing. It involves drawing a bearing line on a paper chart or an electronic navigational chart from a prominent point, landmark, or any conspicuous object to the safe side of the danger area. The common application of clearing bearing for commercial ships is to use it as a reference point in course alteration. It is marked in our passage plan to serve as our reference point or guide, that when we bear to that specified landmark or conspicuous object, it is now the time to alter course to the next waypoint, giving as the signal that we will execute the helm, so that during the course alteration, we will stay along the planned track. Clearing bearing is one of the key elements that should be marked in our passage plan. In my previous video, I have shown you how to determine the point of no return, abort point, emergency anchorage, and no-go areas. If you are unfamiliar with these, kindly check the link in the description. In this video, I will show you how to determine and mark clearing bearings. There are two scenarios in this video. The first scenario is to use the clearing bearing to avoid a navigational hazard. The second scenario is to use it during course alteration towards the next waypoint. Let's proceed to our first scenario. This navigation technique is usually used to avoid navigational hazards, in which the vessel's GPS receiver and radar are not operational. Assuming this is the vessel's planned track, and she is sailing at night, proceeding at a course of 033 degrees true. The visibility is good and her destination point is here. There is a strong easterly tidal current with a speed of 3 knots. Due to this current, the boat might drift towards a navigational hazard, so we will use the clearing bearing to avoid the obstruction. Let us mark first the no-go area. We will use this lighthouse to set our clearing bearing. Draw a bearing line from the lighthouse passing outside the no-go area. If you are using a paper chart, bring the triangle to the compass rose to determine the bearing. If the lighthouse is observed from the boat, it bears 020 degrees true. If the boat goes beyond the bearing line, she will go through the obstruction. NLT means, not less than, and NMT is, not more than. To determine whether it is not less than, or not more than, let's bring back this ship to its initial position. If we observe the bearing of the lighthouse from this position, it bears 035 degrees true. As the boat continues to sail, and steer a course of 033 degrees true, she is drifting to her starboard due to current. Upon reaching this point, the observed bearing is 028 degrees true. As you can see, the observed bearings are decreasing. If the lighthouse bears less than 020 degrees, the boat goes into an obstruction. This is the reason why our clearing bearing is not less than. Assuming that there is another navigational obstruction on the port side of the planned track. The direction of the tidal current is westerly. We will use the same lighthouse as our reference for the clearing bearings. But first, we will mark this obstruction as no-go area. Then draw a bearing line from the lighthouse, keeping a safe distance from the obstruction. Use the navigational triangle and compass rose to determine the bearing of this line. This bearing line is 048 degrees true. Let's determine why it is not more than. As mentioned earlier, if the boat's position is here, the lighthouse bears 035 degrees true. When the boat is adrift to port due to external forces, the bearing of the lighthouse increases. If the boat's position is here, the lighthouse bears 041 degrees true. As the boat goes off track to port, the bearing of the lighthouse increases. When the bearing is greater than 048 degrees true, she might go into an obstruction. But remember that when the boat crosses this bearing line, the bearing of the lighthouse starts to increase even if she stays along the planned track. Continuous monitoring of the vessel's position should be done to determine if the vessel is already cleared from the navigational obstructions. This kind of navigational technique is useful to avoid navigational hazards, most especially if your radar is not operational. The second application of clearing bearing is commonly used during course alteration. Assuming that this is the ship's planned track, and the wheel over point is here. Wheel over point is the point along the planned track in which, when the ship arrives at this point, a helm should be executed so that the ship will start to turn towards the next waypoint. I made a separate video how to determine the wheel over point, kindly check the link in the description. We will use this lighthouse as our reference point during course alteration. Next, draw a line from the lighthouse intersecting the wheel over point. Then bring the triangle to the compass rose to determine the bearing of the lighthouse when the ship arrived at the wheel over point. The bearing of the lighthouse is 087 degrees true when she is at the wheel over point. To determine why it is not more than. When the ship arrived at this point, the bearing of the lighthouse was 073 degrees true. When the ship arrived at this point, the bearing of the lighthouse was 080 degrees true. As the ship moves ahead towards the wheel over point, the bearing increases. That is why the clearing bearing is not more than. It means that when the lighthouse bears 087 degrees true, the ship is already in wheel over point, and it's time to execute helm to starboard so that the ship will start to turn towards the next waypoint. If the ship helm is executed when the bearing of the lighthouse is more than the set clearing bearing, then the ship goes beyond the planned track, and it might endanger the vessel if there is a navigational hazard ahead. Monitoring the bearing of the navigational aid can be done visually using the gyro repeater, or by using a radar. This video serves only as a guide, if you are on board, and it is stated in the company policy how to set the clearing bearing, then it should be followed. Always follow the company policies stated in the SMS manual for the safety of your vessel. That's all for now. I hope you find this video helpful. Thank you for watching. Bye.